Hello, I'm Scott Hammond from INSEAD Communications, and I'd like to welcome you to another INSEAD Knowledge Cast. Today I'm with two of our professors, Kishore Sengupta, Professor of Information Systems, and Luc van Wassenhove, who is a Professor of Operations Management here and also the Director of our Social Innovation Center. Thanks for joining me, both of you. You've just published an article in the Harvard Business Review. The February 2008 issue has just come out. The article begins with what I found was a kind of an unsettling anecdote about a very senior manager who is entrusted with an extremely high-level, high-budget project and fails. Kishore, could you give us a little bit more detail on that anecdote?
Sure. I met Alex about 10 years ago. Alex is a real-life figure. He is a very senior manager in a large organization and develops and implements. He's in charge of a large team, and the team delivers very large and complex projects that creates outputs that we all use. And
you came out of this with a phrase that is intriguing, the experience trap. One of your conclusions looking at this and many other cases like it is that serious experience is sometimes not just an asset, it can also be a trap. And why is that?
Well, this is a problem that I've been looking at for the last 15, 16 years. Now, what happens is that over a period of time, if you look at 20 years, 30 years, software projects have a very long history of failing in some fundamental way, time, cost, quality, whatever it is. And that doesn't seem to have changed in a very big way, despite all the technological improvements we have, despite all the tools that we have, and so on. So what interested me about this problem was, what is it that we can look at in terms of how managers do things, the decisions they make, and what role does experience and learning come into it? And what we found was that there is something which could be potentially wrong. Conventional wisdom holds that as we do more things more and more often, we learn from experience, we gain knowledge, and we get better and better. And what we found in our research was that actually some of it may not be the case. Once a project gets beyond a certain size and becomes complex, and this complexity can happen very quickly, managers tend to absorb things from their experience which may be counterproductive. For example, what could happen is that a project could have time delays. So you hire people, it takes time for them to come on board, and it takes time for them to get trained and be completely productive. Even something you would imagine as simple as that has a capacity of tripping up projects time and time again. And you might ask that, fine, the first time around a manager might make mistakes, but why the second and third time? And that in essence is what we call the trap, that managers tend to learn the wrong lessons and they tend to apply them again and again in a way which is fundamentally counterproductive.
Is there something particular about software development that lends itself to these kinds of dangers?
I really think it has a wider applicability. Most of the projects are complex. They're complex in that the decision that you take now, you only may see the effect later. And that may not be very clear. You may get the wrong feedback or uncertain feedback on your decisions. So there are time delays, there are interdependencies between projects because they use common resources. And that's true for any type of projects, whether you're talking about construction projects or about software projects. Of course, there's some particularities of software projects. I mean, like quality management within the software is something perhaps specific about software, and how many resources you would spend to, say, quality assurance in the software versus development of code. But you have similar issues in other projects, and I think these decision traps, sort of believing that experience will help you, and then trusting that experience blindly without questioning the knowledge in a new situation is very tricky.
You talk about time lags between causes and effects as being one of the elements here, but also about what you call fallible estimates. What do you mean by fallible estimates?
What happens very often is you start off with a bunch of unrealistic estimates, and sometimes also, incentives or goals that are not very realistic. And then we have also, and this is, I mean, Kishore can react to that. We had long discussions on it. We have this culture of, you got to do it, right? And so it's very difficult to renegotiate or readjust even when you get information during the project. So people stick with their old estimates and sort of like they ignore reality, and of course they make things worse.
Now the estimates are not only unreliable. What happens is this. So you give me estimates that I don't trust because I know that they've been unreliable from the past. Now what I do with it is that I start playing games and I ask for quite a bit more money, more resources and all of that. Now what do I do with that? In essence, the nature of the environment is such that I end up wasting much of it. So having unreliable estimates is not only a problem, what it does is it creates a certain dynamic which leads to projects becoming more and more and more unproductive. So it
becomes a sort of a vicious circle.
Yes. And that's the notion of conservatism. So if, for example, you tell me it takes 10 days to do something, I say, no, it's not going to take 10 days. I ask for 15 days, and then I may actually take 15 days and not do very much more. So I have not been very productive in those 15 days.
You talk about also a goal bias. Your initial goals are biased in some ways.
That's really interesting, and I think I've seen it being so widespread across projects. It's almost unbelievable. Think of a situation where you're given a goal that you're not going to spend more than so much money in a software project. Oftentimes, what happens is that managers they will try to limit what they spend, and they will try to cut down on quality control. For example, at the end of the day, they will create a product that not only doesn't meet the cost goals, but also is not very good. So they end up spending much more money trying to fix the problems than they would have if they had not had the constraint of the cost goals. So in other words, many of the goals that we give to our managers are actually counterproductive.
What methodology did you use to try to structure things in a way so that your results were statistically viable?
Yeah, so what happened was that this was many years ago when my other colleague, Tariq Abdul Hamid, he was developing a model which captured how projects work over a period of time. And then what we did is we turned that into a game. So you could be a manager and you would run a project from start to finish. And we would look at the decisions that you've made and analyze the pattern of decisions and then understand how the learning works or doesn't work, as the case may be. And I think the really powerful part of it is that many managers have played the game, literally hundreds of managers. And we've asked them, after every game, how realistic is the game? I mean, how does it mimic your experiences in your everyday life? And they've all said, look, this is very close to what we get. Unfortunately, this is very close to what we get because in their real lives, I mean, projects are just as problematic.
So when you call it a game, you're being a little bit maybe too modest. It sounds like it's a simulation in the sense, almost in the way you train.
Simulation tool.
You train pilots with a simulator. It's not a game because they have to fly these planes. Is that what this simulation does as well? Is give them?
It tries to mimic as reliable as possible what a real project development environment would look like. And so as you go through the simulation, you have to take a number of decisions. So it's like you simulate the project, and then every 20 days or every 30 days in the project, you have to take a number of decisions based on the status of the project at that point in time. So in that sense, it is a simulated environment, and you could compare it with a flight simulator, although that's much more physical, real. It's almost like a real plane, right? Compared to this is a computer background. Now, what we've done, what's interesting, what Kishore was hinting at, is that many experienced managers went through this simulation and made all these errors. And the discussion afterwards, said, yeah, this was very realistic, and still we run into these mistakes, which means that these things are very deeply ingrained into their experience, and they can be very tricky. So in a way, you have to help them unlearn what they've already learned, and give them tools so that they can avoid these types of mistakes.
The analogy with a flight simulator, the flight simulator is obviously you're doing it on the simulator so you don't risk human life and a very expensive piece of machinery. These are projects also that are quite expensive that they could be doing, making these mistakes for real. Right?
It's sort of funny because if somebody doesn't perform well in a project organization, you'll just call a manager from the outside in and replace the old one by the new one. And you just assume that the new one who comes in with experience from somewhere else will do very well using his experience or her experience. You wouldn't trust a pilot who flies type A of airplane to step into type B airplane and take 300 people across the ocean safely, would you? Nobody would be as foolish to step into that plane. These people go through a 6 months training in a flight simulator to unlearn what they were doing in the old plane and learn what they need to do in the new plane, because that new plane happens to react differently. The same is true with project environments in companies. So that's what this experience trap is really, about. It's not because you've been 20 years in the business and been very successful at Motorola, that you will be able to go in at IBM and do good projects there. Not necessarily.
So your article then goes on to make some very specific recommendations about some of the things that you can do to avoid the experience trap. You begin by saying that more cognitive feedback would be helpful. What does that mean?
Well, one of the problems we've seen is if you think about the feedback that managers get, right? You do things, you get lots of reports, and the world is not short of information. In fact, you might argue that there's too much of it. Unfortunately, what they get is not very insightful. It doesn't connect actions with outcomes. It doesn't connect them over a period of time and doesn't show how their actions have actually evolved during that period of time. And that's the essence of cognitive feedback. Now, in most environments that we are familiar with, if you do something now, the effects are only going to show up later on. How much later? Is it 2 days? Is it 10 days? Is it 20 days? And what's the nature of the effect? And it is these kinds of insights that we can provide, or rather that companies can provide by designing the feedback differently. It's not as if they don't have the information. It's also not as if they don't sort of give the managers information, except they don't give them the information in a way that the managers can look at the information, understand what's actually going on, and then draw what you might call the right conclusions, which can help them in this project as well as future projects. I mean, that's what we call cognitive feedback.
Just assume that you would have 5 or 6 projects that you're running, okay? And they're all in some stage of completion. You got people working on the different projects. Now, one of them gets in trouble. Many people would be tempted to take people away from the projects that are doing well, put them on the project that is in trouble. Now, of course, you might create problems in the other projects that way, right? And then it may not give you good results on the project that is in trouble because it may take too long for those people coming in to get adjusted to the new project, to get trained by the people who are already in the project. So the project might finish without those people that you have put in there having been very useful. But you would just go on and then solve the problem in the next project that you just created. Nobody will give you feedback and say you transferred those people and it wasn't really useful because it was too late and it took too much time for these people to adjust to the problems in the other project. I mean, that would be, a form of feedback that one could give to you that would help much more than just statistics about what's late and what has it cost and, which is not cognitive feedback.
You talk about using model-based decision tools as one of the ways that you can address this as well. Could you say a little bit more about what that entails?
The larger theme that we are looking at in this case is the notion of mental bookkeeping. And what we are arguing is this, that when you look at managers and how they make decisions, we as people, we as decision makers don't do a very good job in making decisions over a period of time. So what we are suggesting is that, so in other words, we don't do the right mental bookkeeping. We hire someone now, how long does it take for the person to come on board? How long does it take for the person to be productive? And therefore, should we hire the person now? That sort of a thing. So what we are suggesting is to equip the managers with what we call a cognitive calculus. And the idea is this, that we could train them so that they could become better at mental bookkeeping. We can also give them guidelines, heuristics, models, simple programs that help them through the deficiencies that we have in how they make these decisions. So that's what we call model-based decision making.
And you speak about setting behavior goals for managers that are starting on projects. How would that work?
Once you give a manager goals, then that will condition how the manager behaves. And if you give them goals that induces behavior which is counterproductive, the real question is, why do we keep giving them those goals? So what we are suggesting is that we turn this logic inside out. We look at what kinds of behavior do we want to foster, do we want to create, and so on. And then look at what are the goals that we need in order to create those behaviors, and then give managers those goals, in addition to perhaps cost and schedule goals. So that's the point of the argument.
Coming back to what Luke was saying about bringing in new people to take over a project when the project is already in danger, how is the person who's got the broad overview supposed to decide about when it makes more sense to stick with the people that already know exactly what the objectives are and try to help them with the problems that they're encountering, or to bring in somebody new who doesn't have all of that background and may take quite a bit of time getting up to speed? That's a pretty difficult call, isn't it?
Well, that's exactly the point that Kishore was trying to make, because you're making these decisions, you're making quite a few of these decisions spaced over time for many different projects. So it's very difficult to keep track of all of that, because the effects will happen later and they may not be blatantly clear unless you look for them and you're trained to do that properly. So what Kishore was alluding to was, if we would have some sort of a heuristic or a mental bookkeeping that would help us keep track of that and tell us, at this point in time it doesn't look like a good idea, have you considered the fact that that might help substantially. So that would be sort of decision aids for people who have to take those decisions all the time in difficult projects. If you have to take one of them, it's not difficult. But if you're running 20 projects and you're dealing with a couple of hundred people, and all these projects are in different stages of completion, it's very easy to fix something here and run away, fix something there, and you lose track of action outcome. And then, of course, these things happen.
If you think about what many managers do when projects are in trouble, they look for help and they look for more people and so on. And you can make a very good case that in many instances, just doing that puts a project in greater trouble. Managers know this, and a lot of experienced managers know this very, very well. Except what happens is that when it comes to a situation where they're faced with a choice of carrying on or getting more people, many managers will go and get more people even though they know that this may get them into trouble. So the point we are making is this, that it's not as if managers don't know many of these things. It's a question of what they know and how they manage to do it. Oftentimes they're not equipped cognitively with the mechanisms that they need to make these choices. They do it out of intuition, and as you know, intuition can fail, right? And that's very similar to the analogy that you were making, that yes, we see activities and we see consequences, except the two may not be connected in time. And that's essentially the same thing that you see in projects.
Kishore, Luke, thanks for joining me today. I'm Scott Hammond for INSEAD Communications. Thanks for listening.